entire architecture family, you have brought international academic recognition to UNS. Terima kasih. Prof. Robert Cowherd joined us under a very specific and vital mission. His Fulbright assignment is to conduct a thorough review of the department curriculum with a special focus on the history and theory of architecture. This is not merely a guest lecture. This is a collaborative academic audit that will help shape how we teach our students to think about the past, the present, and the future of the built environment. That is why today's public lecture titled the Theorizing Historicizing Theory is so perfectly aligned with his work. Prof. Cowherd will challenge us to see history and theory not as separate subject, but as a continuous critical conversation. And as he reviews of our curriculum, his insight will help us strengthen precisely this conversation in our classroom. Following the lecture, we will open the architectural exhibition saat Prairie bertemu tropis, pengaruh Frank Lloyd Wright terhadap arsitektur Indonesia. When the Prairie meet the topic, the influence of Frank Lloyd Wright on Indonesian architecture. This exhibition offers a concrete example of what happened when a powerful architectural theory, right, organic prairie architecture, travel across ocean and adapt to our tropical context. It reminds us that history and theory are not dead texts. They live in building, in adaptations, and in our own Indonesian architectural identity. To Prof. Robert Cowherd, thank you for your accepting this responsibility. Your review of our history and theory curriculum will leave a lasting legacy for UNS. And to our students and faculty, engage deeply, ask questions, learn from this rare opportunity, let the prairie meet the topic, and let us build a stronger, more thoughtful curriculum for future. With that, it is my honor to declare this combined event officially open. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dodi, for the valuable speech. And now we are coming to the main event, the public lecture. To guide this discussion, it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today, Professor Ovita Purwani. Please welcome Professor Ovita.
Hello. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. And I am Ovita Purwani, and I will be the moderator for this public lecture. And before we begin, I would like to introduce Professor Robert Cowherd to you all. Professor Robert Cowherd is a professor at Wentworth Institute of Technology, where he teaches courses on architectural history, urban studies and design, and also supervises graduate student research. He has written extensively on architecture and urbanism. His recent publications include drawing histories to be published by MIT Press and Lessons from the Indonesian Kampung, published by Universidad Politeknika Catalunya, and Batavian Apartheid, Mapping Bodies Constructing Race, a piece in the Southeast of Now Journal, published by NUS Press 2021. Professor Cowherd came here as a Fulbright Specialist at the Fulbright Specialist Program, but this is not the first time that he received funding from Fulbright. His prior connections with the Fulbright program include Fulbright Scholar Grant for research in Medellin, Colombia, and a Fulbright Study or Research Grant for research in Bandung and Jakarta. And Professor Cowherd holds a PhD in the History and Theory of Architecture and Urban Design certificate from the MIT and a Bachelor of Architecture from the Cooper Union. Also, I would like to thank you for Fulbright as the main sponsor for that makes it possible for this to happen. Okay, I think we can just start now. So, please, Professor Cowherd, the floor is yours.
Thank you, everyone. Before I get into it, could I request sharing? Okay. Thank you for your patience. So I'm very grateful to be here today and to have this opportunity. My talk is in 3 parts, and I expect it will be about 40 minutes. long. Let's see. This is a topic I've been working on for quite a while, and I put a few of the prior versions of this topic in the slideshow, just in case someone is interested in going deeper. I don't expect many will, but if they do, it's here. I want to start by saying thank you to so many people who made this possible. Let's see. First, I want to thank the team at Fulbright Indonesia, Aminef, who have been so supportive despite all of the difficulties with the United States government in the past eternity since last January, 2 Januaries ago. And they really overcame many obstacles to make this possible. And so I'm first and foremost so grateful to Aminef and Fulbright Indonesia for being so flexible, creative, and resourceful. Secondly, I want to thank the rector, Professor Hartono, represented here today by the third vice rector, Professor Dodi Aryawan. Thank you very much. The dean of the engineering faculty, Professor Wahyudi Satopo, represented here today by the first vice dean, Professor Eko Surojo. I want to also take an opportunity to thank the people at Javanology who have received the materials that I developed during 4 years of research in the 1990s at the Kraton Surakarta. I was able to donate my archive of drawings and photographs from that research to a place where it might possibly be of benefit to students of architecture and other researchers in the future years. So I'm very grateful to Professor Sahid Tugu Widodo and his colleague, Dr. Taufik Al-Makmoum. So thank you very much to Javanology. I also want to thank the architecture department head, Professor Fausan Iksan, who has been very welcoming, both as the department head and as a valued member of the history theory teaching faculty at UNS. The excellent faculty of architecture have extended the warmest of welcomes to me in true solo style, especially the wonderful faculty of history and theory at UNS. They've opened their classrooms to me, allowed me to sit in, discuss with me, sometimes at great length, about details of the program. So I want to name them each: Ofita Purwani, Fausan Iksan, Nadia Hermianto, Hana Anida, Titis Pitana, Avi Marlina, Sri Yuliani, and finally and especially, I want to thank the volunteers, the undergraduate students who volunteered to engage in a very intensive, short time period research project on a topic that we workshopped together and came up with an idea that we see in the lobby that manifested yesterday after so many hours of work on top of their demanding deadlines of an already heavy course requirements. I really think they should be proud of this exhibition. It is truly an advanced and very sophisticated piece of research that is quite high in level. And I joked while we were doing it that maybe we could make it a coffee table book and maybe it could be a more serious piece of research. And now that I see it, I realize maybe it's not so far-fetched that this topic should be explored in greater depth. So I want to name them, if you'll allow me: Iqbal Ridwan, Jadio Pradipta, Rinta Safiri, Faisa Aurin, sorry, Dafina Arcito, Angel Saputri, Mayra Prasetyo, Muhammad Oseandra, Gita Prasiwarsari, and Olivia Andika. They really, I think they deserve some applause for what they've done. I also want to thank to everyone who's attending in person and to everyone attending online. And I hope the recording of this session will be available more widely, because I think this is not the conclusion of some study. It's certainly not an audit, really. It's a collaboration. It's a discussion. And this is not the end of it. This is the very beginning of this discussion. I should also thank the graduate students who took time to meet with me on Saturday mornings several times during my stay here. Your work is inspiring, very important, and I'm so grateful to have access to some of these issues that are so interesting. I wish we had an Estiga program at Wentworth, because I would like to invite you to continue your research in the United States at Wentworth, if there could be some funding to support that. It's very expensive. So those are the thank yous. A very important aspect of this whole experience with the Fulbright Specialist Program is that this is not so much an audit as it is an exchange, even though it's very difficult to bring members of the UNS faculty to the United States to make it a true exchange. To the extent possible, we have been sharing each other's experiences, each other's struggles. Here's what we teach here in UNS, and we compare it with what we teach and how we teach at Wentworth. Wentworth is not, we don't teach the same as every other institution in the United States, but we are part of the struggle. We are part of the struggle to figure out how to do a better job of teaching history and theory in the architecture curriculum. And it is truly remarkable how similar our struggles are, how similar our curriculum is. I didn't have the time to put together a curriculum chart from Wentworth to compare it in the same format as the curriculum chart for UNS, but it is remarkably similar. 2 credits of theory for 2 semesters, 2 credits of history for 2 semesters. Here at UNS and in Boston, we teach 4 credits of history theory together for 2 semesters. So 8 credits at UNS, 8 credits at Wentworth, and the curriculum materials are remarkably similar. We teach an awful lot of the same things. The big difference here at UNS is there is a local architectural tradition that can be taught on its own terms, in its own context. The Nusantara semester of architectural history is a very special thing. And I think it is exactly the right thing for these students. And so supportive of making the Nusantara vernacular pre-colonial architecture first and foremost, the first experience of history for the students of UNS, and then going to the Moncha Nagara semester, which in the United States, our indigenous practices, our vernacular, was wiped out by colonialism. So in the United States, we have settler colonialism that displaced and eliminated the local population and the vernacular cultures, which makes it thankfully very different from the experience in Indonesia, where the vernacular cultures remained somewhat intact. So that's the big difference. This lecture really comes out of the most simple comparison between the two programs. At Wentworth, we teach history and theory as a single topic. It's history, theory, theory, history. It's history informed by theory, and theory that is generated out of the evidence of history. And so this is something we set up for many different reasons, most of them not very, just because faculty did not want to teach lots of 2-credit courses. The faculty prefers to teach one big 4-credit course than teaching 2 smaller courses. And so that's why it's combined. It's not a very compelling reason. But coincidentally, we have discussed this issue for years and years and really found it to be useful to be explicit that this is history informed by theory and theory informed by history. So the integration of history and theory is crucial. And that's the biggest difference between the Wentworth program and the UNS program in terms of the UNS program teaches a 2-credit theory course at the same time as a 2-credit history course. Attending both the history and theory courses, we see lots of theory in the history course, and we see lots of history in the theory course. But it's more subtle and less explicit. And I think that this is an issue that can be discussed. We continuously discuss it in the United States. Many schools in the United States teach history and theory exactly the way UNS teaches it, split. And our faculty at Wentworth, the most common topic that we talk about is my colleagues believe that there's not enough theory in our history. And when I say, what do you mean by theory? And they say, we need to show slides with just words. It boils down to that. Theory is slides without words. I mean, with only words, no pictures of buildings. And so we're engaged in the same discussion that I'm presenting here. The reason I'm presenting it in a way is to ask your help in helping us figure this out. So I'm really looking forward to the questions and your contributions in the discussion to help us all together figure out what is the best way to teach these topics. So 3 parts. The first 2 parts are very short. I hope they're clear. The third part is kind of a bonus part where I offer one specific theory that I believe deserves to be the theory, the lens through which we view history in the 21st century. So thank you for indulging me. I hope this is clear. Maybe in the recording there can be a simultaneous translation, which seems to work for Wyong, so why not lectures? So the first slide of the content is kind of about a personal part of my journey. When I was in school studying architecture as an undergraduate at the Cooper Union in New York City, I was fortunate to have as a professor to my advanced theory course, Peter Eisenman, a very famous architect and an even more famous architectural theorist. And he was at the time collaborating on a book with the famous, some would say infamous, French critical theorist by the name of Jacques Derrida, the father of deconstructivism, a very esoteric French theory that emerged in the 70s and 80s through the work of Jacques Derrida. And I found it fascinating and infuriating to try to read. Has anyone tried to read anything written by Jacques Derrida? Yeah, two. My recommendation is do not read Jacques Derrida. I invested so much effort to try to understand Jacques Derrida. And it wasn't until somewhere near the end of the semester that it became crystal clear that one of the purposes of Jacques Derrida's approach was to get us to question everything. And when I say question everything, what I mean is even the meaning of the words that we use. What do we mean by everything? What do we mean by question? And to explore those questions endlessly. And the result is to cripple theory. The result is to cripple the ability of theory to perform any useful function in society. This is a conclusion I reached. I looked back at it. I developed it into a publication that was published in 2009. And if you're interested, you could look at that publication of how I reached this conclusion. As harmful and destructive as deconstructivist theory was, when Peter Eisenman collaborated with Jacques Derrida and brought it into architectural production, it actually produced some really interesting, provocative architectural work. And the best thing about the architectural work is no one insists that you understand the theory of this work. The show that was produced at the Museum of Modern Art, it opened the same time that I was taking classes with Jacques Derrida. And the 8 or 9 architects whose work was shown at the Museum of Modern Art did not share a shred of common understanding of what deconstructivists meant. They were all independently responding to the ideas of deconstruction and producing very interesting, provocative work. And these architects, who were not famous previous to the show, went on to become some of the most famous architects of the present moment. Rem Koolhaas, Zaha Hadid, whose work is shown here, Daniel Libeskind, who designed the tower to replace the World Trade Center. These architects were elevated to fame despite the fact that there was never any interest or any effort to really understand what the theory of deconstructivism means for architecture. And I wish I could come back in the fall and be present in the theory course when my excellent colleagues turn their attention to teaching deconstructivist architecture in the classroom for the students of UNS. Good luck. So one of the key pivot points of my research was a conference in 2003 sponsored by the theory journal, the high theory journal called Critical Inquiry. And at this conference, there was a crisis. The crisis occurred because the President of the United States, the week prior, had launched a war on Saddam Hussein in Iraq. And this war was launched against all logical understanding of why someone should fight a war. And a grad student asked a provocative question. A graduate student in the audience asked, "What good is criticism and theory if we concede, in fact, how much more important the actions of Noam Chomsky, the famous linguist who has taken his linguistics theories and left them aside and talked about politics and power, especially critical of the power of the United States. How much more important the actions of Noam Chomsky are in the world than in all the writings of critical theorists combined. And one by one, the people on the podium agreed that critical theory, so-called, it was called critical, they called it themselves critical theory, and part of that was the work of Jacques Derrida, had served to make theory something that was very high and separate and isolated away from the real world. And the criticism was, what good is theory if it self-isolates, if it removes itself from the real world, so that nothing that happens in the realm of theory can possibly have any influence on the real world. And so this was a turning point, and around 2003, there were at least 5 articles, important journal articles, looking at this question, and it gave rise to this idea of post-critical theory. And this is my contribution to that many years later, looking back, in which I make the point that the problem with so-called critical theory is that it's not critical of actual real things. The word critical was misapplied to this category. It's not critical of real life. It's critical internally of its own discussions, and thus further isolating itself from any impact on the real world. The quote that people seem to find most compelling in this article that I keep getting quoted is, the danger is not that we proceed without theory. The danger is thinking we can proceed without theory. And this was a term of post-criticality, that we are now beyond critical theory. Now we just produce buildings, which I claim is a very dangerous thing, to pretend that we can produce architecture without any theoretical basis. It's a very dangerous thing to pretend to understand. So I think that's the end of the very challenging theoretical part. And now it's time to demystify theory, which could have been the title of this talk, is demystifying theory so that we can actually make use of theory again. We need theory. Theory happens naturally. If you erased all theory of the human race, if you just got rid of it and you put humans in a social setting, theory would come back. And I always think of this, my friend, I played the trumpet when I was a child. The most expensive thing my family ever bought for me was a trumpet. It was really expensive. It was just a trumpet, but it was the most valuable thing I had. And I had to be very careful with it. My friend dropped her trumpet. It didn't look this bad, but this is the photo I found on the internet. She dropped her trumpet and she was devastated. It bent. And I was terrified. Oh my God, what if I drop my trumpet? So that was me as a child developing theory. I developed the theory based on the history of my friend dropping her trumpet. My theory was, dropping the trumpet is something I will regret. I don't want to drop my trumpet. And that theory is abstract enough. If I abstract it further, I would say that I would articulate a theory of, do not drop valuable things. Now, the most valuable thing I own is this laptop. And I've applied my theory that was born out of the history of my friend's trumpet. I'd apply that theory throughout my life to anything of great value. Don't drop your laptop. Do not drop your baby. So this is a very useful theory. It doesn't have to be impossible to understand. And there can be pictures involved on the slide, not just words, but you can have a picture. Don't drop valuable things. So this is my evidence that theory occurs naturally, and it's dangerous to pretend that theory doesn't happen. And Eleanor Roosevelt famously said, learn from the mistakes of others. You can't live long enough to make all the mistakes yourself. So the theory is something that humans do. And we need to embrace the fact that theory is normal in everyday life to overcome the fear of theory. When I say the word theory to my students, they get scared. When my faculty, when my colleagues start using the word theory, they grow quiet and they start to speak in a different language. And this is not healthy and it's not useful. And to refer back to the critical inquiry conference where the graduate student said, why is it that everything we do is so unimportant compared to what Noam Chomsky does when he engages in the real world? And so we need to embrace the fact that theory is something that naturally occurs whenever we look at history. We look at history, one of the most important reasons to look at history is to develop theories that we can then apply to novel situations. It's not exactly the way it was when the first time it happened, but we can apply the lesson of the dropped trumpet to babies. And we can apply the lessons of prior architectural history. We can apply those lessons to our projects in the 21st century. And to pretend that there's nothing to learn there, that is something that happened in the history of architecture. When Walter Gropius went to, he fled from Germany in the 1940s and the 1930s, and he landed at Harvard University, and he became the chairman of the architecture program. And he took an approach. He said, we will not teach history in architecture. Architects need to forget history. Architects need to just look forward. There is no role for history to be taught in the architecture curriculum. So in a way, the mistakes of the 20th century emerged out of an abandonment of history and a loss of the theory that emerges naturally out of history. Okay, on to the second part. So I often begin my courses at Wentworth and my talks everywhere that judging from the outcomes of the 20th century, whatever we did in the 20th century, given what happened, given the mess we have inherited in the 21st century, maybe we should look at what we did in the 20th century and do the opposite of that. Let's just do the exact opposite of anything we did in the 20th century. And so one of the things that yielded is the idea that history is the most important thing for students to learn when studying architecture. And the reason history is so useful is because the theory that emerges out of history. And so this is the assignment that my students do every week in the history course, in the history theory course. We ask them to read or to look at, because students don't read, we ask them to look at a chapter of a textbook that presents a story of a certain chunk of architectural history. Then the faculty take our best shot at revising that and updating that and challenging that. So we're the first ones to present a challenge to that prior history. So we present a version of the history that's different from what the textbook says. And then we say, okay, students, it's your turn. Now, we don't want you to prepare a whole lecture. We want you to choose one example, and we want you to use your skills because they're already in the third semester, fourth semester of the program. We want you to use your drawing skills to interrogate one piece of architecture. So this is an example of one piece of architecture being interrogated by the skills and the methods of drawing. And so they use dark lines to highlight certain aspects, and they are challenged to characterize this feature of the architecture is producing this user experience. So this is already a theory of architecture. The theory of architecture is that we need to move away from grand metaphors, that the architects tell stories to each other and no one else ever hears it, no one else ever understands it, that this is a metaphor of water or a metaphor of a bird. These metaphors, these grand metaphors, mean nothing. This is a theory. The theory is grand metaphors mean nothing unless and until it manifests in architectural experience. So we recenter the experience of users, of humans. Humans are the ones who experience the architecture. And so it is the challenge of the next generation of architects to approach the meaning of architecture through the eyes of real human beings. I often paraphrase Forrest Gump. Architecture means what it means because it does what it does. They seem to like that. But we don't stop with the drawing. So as the students figure out how to draw, we then ask them to confirm for us the meaning that they are extracting from the drawing by writing a paragraph. And it's a very prescriptive piece of writing where in the middle, it's always 6 sentences long. In the middle of those 6 sentences are 4 sentences. Each sentence takes one aspect of the architecture and it makes a claim. This window, this facade of large windows floods the interior with light, so people experience that. So this architectural decision, this form, this idea of form translates into this user experience. That is the source of meaning. And so they choose 4 of the things they've identified in the drawing and they write a sentence. This form produces this experience, and that is the source of meaning. And then we practice composing a bold claim, and we put that first. Then at the end, we practice producing a provocative transition to an issue that they might want to write about if they were writing more. And we do ask them to write more. When they show up in class on Thursday mornings, they present these drawings to each other and the paragraphs to each other. And then as a group, they workshop what is the logical sequence of these different drawings, of this architectural evidence. And the challenge is for them to create their own story out of their own work with the evidence of history. So they are collectively developing theory as a joint exercise. And once they've workshopped a sequence, they present it to each other towards the formation of a theory. And towards the end of the semester, we're actually able to ask them to create an outline of the evidence and to do collaborative writing to translate the evidence of history into a theory. Sometimes that theory confirms what the textbook says and what the professors say. But we challenge them to not say anything that they cannot show. And this is revolutionary. If you're not allowed to say or write something unless you can show the evidence, the visual evidence of it, all of a sudden it limits what we can say. We can't just say anything we want. We can only say things that we are able to show. And I am thrilled that we brought that same standard to UNS, to the 10 students who collaborated together to make the exhibition. So this is the test. The exhibition is not a final version. Really, when you look at the exhibition, I request that you look at the sentences that the students have written and look for the evidence that supports that sentence. And I think we should have pens out there in the lobby. And anytime there's a sentence that isn't supported by the visual evidence, I think maybe we cross it out or put a question mark there so we can improve this. And if this is the way architects and intellectuals generally, if this is the way we engage with the evidence of history in our formation of theory, which is one of the most important responsibilities of educated people, this is a high standard, and it transcends the efforts of artificial intelligence to trick us into believing things that it hallucinates. So it's a remedy. We're trying to develop it as a remedy for artificial intelligence. In the next semester, we haven't yet called it History Theory 3, but we think of it as History Theory 3. We break students into different groups. Some students look at cities, some students look at historic preservation, and some students look at building technologies. The group I have look at cities, and so we ask them to use photographic evidence and to engage with the photographic evidence without covering it up. When you draw diagrams and arrows, it tends to obscure the evidence. So it's crucial that we have access to the evidence. And when they invite us to accept their theory, they're inviting us to look at the evidence and to make sure that they're not saying something that they're not showing. And it's an invitation to please, reader, please confirm that I'm getting this right, or let me know how I'm getting this wrong so I can improve it. So it becomes every act of writing, every act of presentation becomes an invitation to a collective process that is ongoing iteratively. And they go so far as to then produce a video, which I hope will load. The video goes through the steps of the analysis, and there's a narration that the student is reading the paragraph that they've written and presenting the evidence and pointing to the evidence with every sentence that they speak. I should have done this in the tech rehearsal. So they start by suppressing everything and then bringing forward using different graphic methods of color, of highlight overlays. And the student is walking us through step by step. First, she says, by eliminating the cars of this street, it produced a flood of people to come back in. The stores thrived. The stores that were closed then opened. The bicycle path over to one side. So this is the diagram. So the final state is looking at the history of this one place in Copenhagen. Then they develop a theory out of the evidence of this history, and they abstract it in order that it might possibly be applied to other locations. So it's a very specific task. Look at the evidence of history, work with it to develop a theory that is grounded in the evidence of history, and abstract it sufficiently so it becomes a theory that is portable. I took my theory of the trumpet and extended it to my laptop and my babies. This is a theory that can be extended from this one location in Europe to possibly being applied to Malioboro, where the cars were not eliminated, but the cars were given less space, and the nightlife of Malioboro was allowed to explode. What could happen on Slamat Riyadi? Then the students enter the graduate program and they do the same thing. They bring those same skills to the thesis program. We ask them to find examples, to work those examples using their skills of graphic development because they're architects, and to write the same kind of paragraph. In pink, you see the 4 sentences that grow directly out of 4 specific aspects of the evidence towards a general theory that they can then apply to their own thesis work. And here's another version of it using lines. And so we've been able to put this generating of theory out of history. This is the historicizing theory. Theory can no longer be disconnected from history. It must be grounded in history. And so the question then turns to, how do we theorize history? Since the 1990s, architectural historians and theorists around the world have been looking at the question, how do we decolonize the curriculum? How do we take the colonial mindset that keeps being reproduced generation after generation, years, a century after formal colonialism has ostensibly put to an end, the ideas of colonialism, the habits of the mindset of colonialism is still with us today. And so, one of the reasons the mindset of colonialism is with us in 2026 is because we keep teaching colonialism. We continuously reinforce the mindset of colonialism in the way conventional education occurs. So in the 1990s, we turned our attention to how do we decolonize the curriculum? And so we started a project to look at non-Eurocentric history. Instead of studying Rome and the Parthenon and Florence and the Renaissance and nothing but the Renaissance, we stop ignoring the vast history of Islam prior to the Renaissance. So suddenly we have all this material to bring into our curriculum of the flourishing of Islam. Instead of dismissing the dark ages of Europe, we go deep into the glorious age of Islam. And then when we get to the Renaissance, we don't ignore the fact that colonialism is what, and slavery are what made the cities of Europe so wealthy that they could build the great constructions that we have always studied. But the problem is, this is new and we don't have access to the materials. We don't have the slides. So some of us got together and we applied for a grant and we got millions of dollars. And for 10 years, we gave grant money to others to develop the curriculum materials and make it freely available to everyone in the world, to make it possible to teach this non-Eurocentric, to replace the Eurocentric materials of history with materials of history that allow us to look at North America prior to Europeans. What was the history of those societies? What was the role of architecture in those societies prior to the arrival of Europe? And we do that for South America, we do that for Asia, and there are around 100 sets of curriculum available for free on the Global Architectural History Teaching Collaborative site. I think Professor Manu Sobti is with us online today, and he is one of the very innovative contributors to this curriculum. And so I'm grateful to Professor Sobti for being here today, and to all of my colleagues at the GAHTC for this remarkable work and its effect on the way we're able to teach. So we teach about the continent of Africa prior to the Portuguese settlements. We teach about the interaction of European oppression, how architecture was a tool of repression, how this indigenous monument in Mexico was buried and replaced with a cathedral at the peak. And these examples there are hundreds and hundreds of these examples in the curriculum, so that we can understand what was there before in relationship to what then happened, and how architecture is not just something to appreciate the beauty. It used to be that the history of architecture was taught through the lens of art history, that it's artistic appreciation of the beauty of the tremendous accomplishment of the architectural aesthetics of Rome, of Florence. And we still teach about beauty and the incredible structural innovations of Chartres Cathedral. But we don't stop there. We also talk about the systems that Chartres Cathedral was part of a competition, an economic competition between different towns and cities to get the relics of the apostles and to attract pilgrimage to boost the economy of those cities. So it wasn't just an incredible structural, the stained glass is beautiful, all of that is true, but it was also part of a global network of power. And this is what the textbook says about the city of Amsterdam. And you can see in the map on this side, it covers three very separate episodes in history. It talks about Protestant Europe, including Amsterdam. Then it talks about the Baroque through the Catholic empires of Portugal and Spain, and then the colonization of the Americas. And so it's treated as three very separate episodes that occur in this time period. So the time period pretends to be neutral, and then these three separate things happened. Instead, the way we teach it is we look at Batavia, Amsterdam as one thing. Batavia, Jakarta, was the south side of this one city. Batavia, Amsterdam, was really the north part of a city and the south part of the city. It used the same idealized canal system, and Amsterdam and Batavia were built simultaneously at two different ends of the trade route between the two. And they were built using the same model. The only reason Amsterdam is a concentric circular form is that they already started a few decades earlier. But it was really the same system. On the Batavia side, it was a system of control of population walled into enclaves. So it was a system of control. And on the north side, it was a system of trust, of trade that made possible the first multinational corporation. Some would say the most powerful multinational corporation in human history, the East India Company, the Dutch East India Company. So this is a different way of looking at the same material. Here, it's isolated as two different things, have nothing to do with each other. And here, it's really one architecture. It's one project. In many cases, it's the same architects working in Batavia and Amsterdam. It's the same painters painting the scenes. It's a remarkable singular project, and that's the way we should teach it. And it's not just, this is something that didn't make it to the exhibition. I wish it had, so I'm putting it here. The final question at the end of the exhibition is, can these influences, the central thesis is that the ideas of Frank Lloyd Wright flowed through many different channels, and through Holland, through sometimes directly to the Dutch East Indies. And those ideas have left home. They've become separate from the creator, Frank Lloyd Wright, and they flourish in new settings in the Netherlands and in Indonesia up to the present. These ideas, we see it in the work of Silaban. The question at the end is there evidence of influence from Indonesia back to the Netherlands and back to the United States? And there is evidence, and this is one of the delightful discoveries of the research we engaged in together, that this is the Javanese wayang puppet of the Kayon, the Gunungan, being represented in the most important, the most iconic building of the Amsterdam School in South Amsterdam. Het Schip is the building by Michel de Klerk. And so this is just the beginning of the exploration of how this is not a one-way influence. This is an exchange, that it went in both directions. So there's the theory that displaces Eurocentrism. And that's an important project that we, as a discipline, we have begun the process of decolonizing our curriculum. But decolonization is one part of what we need. What about the challenges of the 21st century? These students are being graduated into a world that is in desperate need of solutions. And architects cannot afford, the world cannot afford for architects to think, oh, you tell us what to build and we'll build it. We only do what the clients ask us to do. It's all about the power of the client. Do not believe that for 1 second. It's the job, it has always been the job of architects to imagine possibilities that the clients cannot begin to imagine themselves. So architects must produce the opportunities for changing the way the world works. And it's not separate from architects. It is central to what the architects must do. So that gives us a challenge. If we have a theory that helps us teach history, like we saw in the decolonizing, we have a theory of Eurocentric architecture, and that theory drives us, that lens of theory makes us interpret the historical record differently. We have to interpret the historical record in a way that decolonizes, that prevents the reproduction of colonial mindsets. What about the climate emergency? What theory can help us teach the history of architecture more effectively in the face of these challenges? Well, if we look at the literature, we come to the conclusion that resistance is futile. There's nothing we can do. This is not a very happy theory. We need a better theory than this. I hope we don't stop here. This is pathetic. Pathetic, hopeless. This is the dominant theory of climate change. There's nothing anyone can do. Jared Diamond, I think he might be the worst one of all. He looked at the evidence of Easter Island and he said, if only they had an anthropologist to teach them that it was going to be a problem if they cut down the last tree. He famously asks, what did it feel like to cut down the last tree? They should have known better. If only they had an anthropologist to teach them that it was a mistake to cut down the last tree, because that's the only way they could make the ocean-going canoes that connect them with the trade network. Once they cut down the last tree, that's it. They die. But I think Jared Diamond is wrong. Whoever cut down the last tree was not a teenage boy who was a vandal. He wasn't a criminal. The last tree was cut down by the king. If he wasn't the king already, he became the king because that last tree was the most valuable thing in the entire society. And this suggests a theory of operating systems, that the outcomes are produced by the rules of the operating system. And so this last part that I'm going to move through very quickly is what happens if we develop the theory of the operating system. What happens if we look at history through the lens of what is the role of architecture in the operation of larger systems? And how can architecture imagine possibilities that change the rules of the operating system? These authors believe that the only way to change things is to have some global government imposing a police state that doesn't allow bad behavior. But the way we got here is because of the rules of the operating system. Every place in the world is unified by the operating system of extractive capitalism. The rules of extractive capitalism boil down to whoever commits the greatest crime, whoever behaves the baddest, the worst, gets the most money and the most power. So that's the current operating system. You can change the people. You can elect a different president. You can change who the CEO of ExxonMobil is. But ExxonMobil has to behave badly. They are obligated to behave badly. If the president of ExxonMobil decided to do something that the world needed, he would be eliminated immediately and replaced by someone willing to behave badly. And that is the operating system. And what we need to do is change the rules of the operating system. And the operating system operates the way it operates because in part through architecture. So we need a theory of how systems operate. What does architecture have to do with the rules of the operating system? And so we develop a theory of systems as the lens through which we understand history. We interpret the historical record through the lens of operating systems and the role of architecture in it. Part of this was inspired by the work of two colleagues of mine at Harvard who developed this idea in the study of Roman architecture. It's not the architecture of the Colosseum and the architecture of the Forum. It's these buildings perform specific functions within this larger grid of the Roman settlement process. The Roman settlement was a machine for reproducing the Roman operating system around the Mediterranean and as far north as Scotland. And the architecture was the essential tool of the operating system that produced the Roman Empire. And so we can look at Roman architecture in that way. We can look at slavery in that way. We can look at the slave ship as an architecture that produces race. The idea of race is constructed, and it's constructed through the architecture of the slave ship. If my students were analyzing this, they would point to the deck. The deck of the slave ship is the piece of architecture that separates those who are enslaved and those who are not enslaved. And those who are enslaved it was written about recently in the 1619 project by Nicole Hannah Jones, who talks about the deck of the ship to suddenly take all these people that don't speak the same language, they've never seen each other before, different religions. All of a sudden, they're chained together in the dark and they become one people, Manyatu sebagai orang hitam, and they are enslaved. They are enslaved by those who are above deck. The people above deck are all kinds of different religions and races, but they are white, the non-slaves. So the architecture of the slave ship is an instrument for producing race. Batavia, in my article about Batavia from 2021, talks about the structure of Batavia in that way. The walled precincts of Batavia produced racial categories that still mark the city of Jakarta now, the names of different areas, and the way Batavia, the way Jakarta is still conceived, is influenced by this system. We look at the Netherlands and how the landscape that they designed and produced to prevent massive loss of life through the flooding required a system of governance where everyone has to take care of their piece of the defensive perimeter. If one person neglected their piece of the levee, then the entire village would flood. And so they had to find an alternative to oppressive top-down, and majority rules democracy was not enough. You can't oppress the minority in this system because they will neglect their dikes unless they're fully empowered to be part of the system. So they developed the polder mentality where all decisions must be made by consensus. Everyone has to agree or they can't do it. And that's required by the physical design of the landscape. And when I present this to students, I talk about how there's this piece of history that happened in Rome. There's a piece of history that happened on the slave ship. It's a piece of history that happened in Holland starting in the 9th century. But because of the rising sea levels, everybody in the world is Dutch. We all have to learn this lesson because the sea levels are rising and our largest cities everywhere in the world are being threatened with the same threat. And maybe the solutions that were produced in this moment in history can be adapted, can be theorized sufficiently to change the way we not just build our cities, but the way we govern our cities. And we look at Singapore and the crisis in 1965 and how they were so desperate to survive that they were willing to design a transit system and a public housing system that would eliminate the need for car usage. And they are still pushing back against the uses of cars by making world-class transportation and improving the quality of their housing, always located near a transit stop. And so the result is one of the greatest success stories of architecture and governance coming together in a singular project. But we are all Singaporean now. We are all facing these similar crises that Singapore faced in 1965. What theory can we learn from Singapore to abstract and adapt and apply to the architecture and urban form of the 21st century? Barcelona is one of my favorite examples recently. I've been living in Barcelona 4 months a year for the last 5 years. And when during the dictatorship of Franco, things fell apart. And when Franco died, the mayor collaborated with the Kepala Departemen Arsitektur in Barcelona, and they collaborated together to transform the city, the neighborhoods of Barcelona, to convince people that architecture and the government could do good things to improve people's lives on a daily basis. And the result is famous. Barcelona is one of the most successfully transformed cities in the world. And many architects point to Barcelona as the model for what we must do in the 21st century. So it's not just me. This is a very popular reference point for architects and urban designers. And we are all Catalan now, given the challenges we face in cities throughout the world. And then my favorite example from the time I spent in Colombia is Medellin, Colombia was the murder capital of the world because of the drug wars. And they were coming out of it, but then the criminal activity in Medellin was exploding in the early 2000s. So a mathematician ran for mayor, and he won by saying, "I will stop stealing the people's money." The city of Medellin owns the utility that generates electricity for a large part of northwestern South America, and it has access to $900 million a year of income from this energy production. Before Fajardo was elected mayor in 2004, that money was lost to corruption. And when Fajardo came into power, he stopped the corruption somehow. And he looked for the worst neighborhoods where the most dead bodies were found. And he built a state-of-the-art, world-class library, a park, and a transportation system to bring people down into the central part of Medellin so they could have jobs and opportunities. And so this became a world-famous project that now there are more than 20 of these library parks, all in the most impoverished neighborhoods in Medellin. And so it's become a very famous example of how architecture working in the service of government dedicated to helping the poorest of the poor can transform a society. It's become a very safe and popular place. I moved there in 2014, and I brought my 2 children and my wife, and we had a wonderful life in Medellin, Colombia. It has become a very safe place, in part because of this project, this alliance between architecture and governance. And the final example I'm reminded of because yesterday in the theory class, the students asked me, "What's your favorite architecture?" And I'm not sure was it your favorite architecture in Indonesia? And I said 2 things. One is the pre-colonial vernacular architecture, which is so interesting, and we have so much to learn from it. And the second is the revival of bamboo architecture that we see in Solo, and we see it in Bali, and we see it in other places. There's some bamboo architecture in Sumatra now. But it's not just these beautiful buildings. Again, if we look at bamboo and vernacular architecture through the lens of history, grounded in how society works, that the bamboo, the crucial aspect of bamboo architecture is that in every village throughout the archipelago, every village is surrounded by a bamboo forest. And when a young couple gets married, the people of the village go out, they harvest bamboo, and every household manufactures a piece of a house because they can, because all you need is a saw and a knife, and you can make thatch, you can make beams, you can make trusses. And so when the young couple is married, everyone in the village shows up for a big party, and they bring their piece of the house, and they build a house. It's a house building party that goes on for days. And the families of the couple provide the food. And at the end, there's a house. And you can do that when there's bamboo. When the Dutch came, they said, no more bamboo, no more thatch. It's not good material. There's pestilence, there's decay. You cannot do it. They outlawed it. So it was replaced with timber. Timber is not something that every 13-year-old knows how to build, the way every 13-year-old knows how to build bamboo back before the ban. So all of a sudden, you need wealth, you need experts, and you need to pay the experts. So all of a sudden, building became a professional enterprise, which takes money. So all of a sudden, the gotong royong part of the sambatan, of the architecture, was lost. And this is so exciting, the revival of bamboo, that I bring my students from Boston to Indonesia. And for 2 weeks, we study how to build in bamboo. And I teach them about sambatan. I teach them about gotong royong. So they have access to these ideas so they can think about the system, the operating system that is connected to this material, this architecture. And it has produced some truly remarkable, innovative buildings, learning from the vernacular architecture that is taught in the Nusantara course of the history curriculum. That's it. Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for tolerating the English. I hope we can have a good discussion now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the very eye-opening presentation. Now I think we have to we get to the Q&A session. So if there's any question, please raise hand. Okay, there's Davina.
Thank you so much, Professor, for the insightful lecture. You told us about how history gives birth to theory, but in your opinion, when should an architect stop using an old theory and decide that it's time to create a new one? How do we know when a theory has expired? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that question. It's a quite simple response. It's the same as in everyday life. We form theories because we need theories. A theory has outlived its usefulness when it takes us away. The most dramatic demonstration, when a theory distracts us from what people need in their everyday lives, then it's time for a new theory. For too long, these star architects of the world have used theory to wow us, like Frank Gehry and the Guggenheim in Bilbao. Wow. Frank Gehry's theory is a theory of wow. I like that. I like that. But I need more than that. We need more than that. The titanium panels on the Guggenheim in Bilbao devastated huge communities in Africa because the mining of titanium is a hugely harmful activity. So after the construction of Bilbao, many architects have developed a theory of environmental devastation and applied that theory to Bilbao, Guggenheim, and to many other buildings that have been produced. Keel Mo, one of my colleagues in Boston, he has developed a theory that many other people have followed, where every time we build a building, we now teach our students, every time you design a building, you need to do an analysis of the carbon footprint of the building that you've designed. You need to do an analysis of the impact on the mining industry and the communities engaged in mining activities all over the world. So it's common for architecture students to say, here's my beautiful building, and here's the environmental impact map and the carbon impact, because that is a theory that we need in the 21st century, so that every time when we're using a computer to design a building, every time we change something, we can watch the carbon impact go up or go down. And that's a new theory for production. If Frank Gehry had that theory, if he had that tool on his computer, then we would not have the Bilbao Guggenheim. Maybe it would be made out of bamboo. Maybe next time it will be made out of bamboo.
Thank you, Professor Robert. This is Ahmed from Pakistan, a British colony in terms of architecture. So I am neither a student of architecture nor history, but I do work on linguistics theory. And I've been working as a visiting lecturer at a university in Pakistan, and linguistic theory, and also theory in criticism. From Chomsky. So I have two questions, and I hope that it would be relevant, and my question would not waste the time for most of the students of architecture over here. So in language, drawing upon the Noam Chomsky conceptualization, we said that there are two structures of language. One is deep, one is superficial. So if I'm not wrong, I can connect it to architecture, that deep structure in language could be something in architecture that is universal, and the one that is not universal but rather local, we might call this like a surface structure of architecture design. So who will now define what could be universal and what could be the local one? Because earlier you said that the curriculum of UNS of architecture studies is similar to the US curriculum or your university. And I hope that the professors in UNS who designed that curriculum would be proud of it. Me, myself, coming from the British colony. But why do we look at the West? Why don't we consider the global South with that weight? Because global South, we now have, like, it is, a reality. It is becoming a reality more than. So why do we tend to move to absolute reality in the West always? And I have a second question that is about the colonizer and being colonized and the meaning. And that too is, if we look at to Samarang, we have Dutch style buildings like the church. Sometimes we do have in Bandung and also in Jakarta. And same happens to the British colony in India and my country. So now when we make theory out of that history, this is related to the second part of the lecture, historicizing theory. Should we consider the one who built these buildings, or should we consider the one who is living in this building now, the inhabitant or the builders? Thank you very much.
So that's three questions. But my favorite one is if Wentworth and UNS are very similar, isn't that a problem? And I agree. Everywhere I go in the United States, I'm shocked. I mean, everywhere I go in the world, I'm shocked when the curriculum is so similar. The students are the same students looking at the same theory. When I speak to the students at UNS, they are like, it's like I'm at home speaking to students in Boston, with some difference. In Boston, we do not have a Nusantara curriculum. Here, Nusantara is half the history curriculum, so it's already very strong. But is that enough? I wish, I don't know if people in the room are familiar with the work of Romo Mangunwijaya. Romamangun was a priest who was an architect. He designed Kali Chodeh, which in a way is the original project of bringing dignity to those who have nothing, who have the least, Kali Chodeh in Yogyakarta. Romamangun wrote a book of history theory called Chitra Vastu Chitra, and it didn't ignore Monchanagara architecture. It wove Monchanagara history theory with Nusantara history theory in a very powerful way. And it became one of the most important books that I had. Long before I did my graduate research, I was in Solo reading Vastu Chitra and being influenced by this approach to theory and history, weaving together the very local genius, the genius loci of Java, of Indonesia, with not ignoring the advances beyond the boundaries, but embracing the way they resonate between the two. And it felt like the indigenous understanding of Nusantara enriched my understanding of everything in the world. And that's really been the story of my trajectory. I feel like everything I have done as a researcher it all started with Kejawen. It all started with what Solo taught me, what the Kraton Surakarta taught me about when I put my hands like this and I say governance and architecture, I'm talking about the tradition of the Kraton, where the Kraton buildings, they're not that special. A lot of wood structures that are rotting and falling down and need a constant attention. Oh my God, what a pain these buildings are. But the buildings are a vehicle for the Kejawen belief system. The spirituality of Kejawen needs a kraton. It needs the Mangkunagaran. The belief system, the non-physical, the non-tangible heritage requires the instruments of architecture. And when you see me put my hands like this at the core principles of this talk, I'm talking about the kraton, really. That's where it started. In terms of Noam Chomsky, I love it when people ask him, Professor Chomsky, how does your linguistic theory connect to your political activism? He claims it has nothing to do with each other. I don't believe him. I don't believe him for a second. That these ideas of structure, of deep and superficial structure that you explained, thank you for that. Yeah, it's there. He understands structure. And so I think a lot of this approach of things like race are a construct. Constructs don't happen on their own. Constructs are constructed, and they're not constructed once. They are constructed every day. They are reproduced in every generation. And how is that construct reproduced? Because of the things we don't think about, the things that we don't have a word for, the things that are baked into the built environment, the structures we occupy. We are structured by the buildings we live in. We are structured by the words and the language we use. And that is the mechanism that reproduces in every generation these oppressive ideas of slavery and colonialism. It won't go away until we acknowledge the structures that reproduce them every generation, and we need to change the structures. Architects are pretty good at changing structures, so we need to be involved. Architects can't do it alone, but some people have said, I'm not sure, that it cannot be done without architects also participating. The third question, what was it? Oh, yes. I like to refer to the Aga Khan Award for Architecture. If you don't know it yet, you should look up the Aga Khan Award for Architecture. Most architecture prizes, like the Pritzker Prize, is the top prize in architecture. In the Pritzker Prize, the white men of the Pritzker Prize look at the world and they say, oh, look, this white male architect is very famous. Let's give him a Pritzker Prize. And so every few years, the white men of the Pritzker jury give a Pritzker Award to a white male architect who's already been acknowledged as a successful architect. It's boring. In contrast, the Aga Khan Award for Architecture looks at projects that have already been built for 5-10 years, and they interview the community around the architecture, and they ask the question, has this architecture changed your life? So this is the right way to do things. Yes, the architect is the one who goes up to the stage and receives the award, but that architect is receiving the award on behalf of the community, often with the community leadership walking up there with them. And it's architects that we've never heard of before, often. So the Aga Khan Award for Architecture is the model of the new way of understanding success. We should honor the success because the community benefits are given dignity. We should honor, and then the community includes the community of people who build those architectures. So the Aga Khan Award is inclusive of users and builders, and yes, the architect as well. But the important questions that they ask are, how did this project benefit the people? So it's a user experience perspective that should be the way we evaluate the work of our students as well. How does it benefit the people who are receiving the architecture? Thank you for that.
Yeah. Okay. Is there any more question?
It's Hari.
Oh yeah, Hari.
Introduce myself. My name is Hari from Master Architecture Program. You mentioned that your students don't read. Regretfully, I'm also one of them. So, okay. So based on your life experience, you said do not drop valuable things. A reaction to your problems at that specific time. So my question is it possible that theory arises from original thought rather than a reaction to a problem? Thank you.
Thank you, Hari. I think in typical 21st century post-structuralist style, I reject the terms of the question. It's not one or the other. It's original thought applied to experience of history. And so 100 people can have the same experience. And every day, 8 billion people on the planet Earth have a similar experience. And what we need is the creative energy, the creative effort that it takes to bring imagination and creativity to looking, to seeing, to understanding that experience and translating that experience and understanding into a theory. From as simple as don't drop valuable things to friends don't let friends destroy the planet they live on. This is a theory that challenges us to put into practice. How do we restructure our operating systems so that we don't drop valuable things and we don't destroy the only planet we have? And think of it as a planet is too much for me. I don't know about you. I can't think about the whole planet. So I think about my world in a much smaller way. Clean up the kitchen, take out the trash responsibly, bicycle to work, don't drive a car. And when you build a building, be aware of the carbon footprint, be aware of the oppression that emerges from specific materials, be aware of the workers in Dubai who are close to the conditions of slave labor because their passports have been taken away from them, and they have to work for very low wages. So be aware of how it affects the builders, be aware of how the architecture affects the community. And everything we do, we can't pretend that it has nothing to do with us. To the extent that architecture has produced the problems of the 21st century, and to a large extent, architecture has produced the problems of the 21st century. Buildings account for 40% of carbon emissions. The largest single chunk of carbon emissions comes from the act of building, operating, and disposing of the architecture. I think transportation is probably an easier one to deal with, but architects have a role in the two largest aspects. And when we build a building in Indonesia, like the campus of Fakultas Teknik, and we make it so there's only one way in and out, we make it so every student, every faculty, every guest, the only way to get here, the only reasonable way to get here is to drive or take a motorbike. When on Saturday I went to an event at TBS, my phone told me, "Oh, don't worry, it's 200 meters from here. You can just go. You just go to TBS. It's 200 meters away." So off I go. Wait, there's a wall. And so I followed the wall and it said, "Oh, you can go through the wall here. It's 500 meters to TBS." So I walk along. The gate is closed and locked and there's no way to. So I ended up walking in a circle along the wall until I returned back to where I started. And then I walked along the roadway out through the front gate. Scary walk to TBS. It was 1.5 kilometers. So, and I notice in the studio, every project that I see in the studio has the first step one, build a wall around the entire property. So there's one way in, one way out. And that's the first thing I would change. So I think that's the issue. We are, the bad news is we're part of the problem. The good news is that means we can change a big part of the problem. It's in our hands to make that change. If we look at history through the lens of how structures construct the problems, the mentalities, and how do our design decisions impact the global climate emergency and oppression and all of these issues. Some of them are things we can change working together, and that's the first thing we need to do. So thank you for your question. This has been great.
there anything else? Any more questions?
The things in the chat.
Yeah, there is one in the chat. I'll read it. This is from Dian Nafi. Is Dian Nafi still here? Do you want to speak it for yourself? No? Okay, I'll read it. It's within the framework of theorizing history. Could local symbols in religious architecture be understood not merely as cultural representations, but as encoded systems of environmental knowledge embedded within space itself?
This touches on one of the wonderful topics I've been able to learn as much as I can about, and that is to shake up my understanding of religion. Because I grew up in the United States, we're very careful in the United States. Just as architecture is separate from everything else, religion is separate from governance, religion is separate from environmentalism. Religion is just this box over here. It changes the way we behave every day, but it doesn't require us to do anything in terms of the environment. And so when I came to Solo in 1991, I learned that religion is not separate, that praying 5 times a day is a way of life, that Sharia rules. Sharia is an operating system, and that operating system dictates how we build our cities, how we build our architecture to produce privacy, to create social order, so that my neighbor's house does not look down on my house. All of these rules of alignment of doorways so that we don't see into the privacy of the house. These are things I spend a week with my students, and I ask them, read this document about the zoning codes, the building codes of Sharia and the case law of Islam, and how it dictates what we build and how we build architecture. And think of this operating system. When we first look at the Islamic city, my students see chaos. It's totally random. And little by little, they start to see the complex adaptive system. I'm using this language very carefully. Complex adaptive system is the fancy theory that we use to describe what we need to address the climate crisis. We need to develop more sophisticated, complex adaptive systems. And so that's the context within which we study Islamic architecture. Islam is a complex adaptive system when applied to the built environment. And it's wonderful to see my students' eyes open to the rules and the order hiding beneath the superficial appearance of randomness. It's not random at all. It's very sophisticated, very complex, and very successful. So thank you, Dianafi.
Is there any more question? Oh, yes, please.
Thank you, Bob, for a very, very interesting talk. My question has to do with the danger of theory turning into ideology. And in some of the slides, we saw fascist architecture, or you see the design of the suburbs in Paris or housing projects in the US cities intended to keep the poor people housed in ways that actually destroy any sense of community that could be possible based on theories of society and governance and ideology. I would think that the way you pose it is it's quite innocent, it seems to me. Theory is as simple as don't drop your trumpet. But don't architects have to be very aware of the power they have to, for instance, the new city in IKN, Nusantara, it draws upon ideologies of power, it seems to me. And Trump's monuments and the way he is redesigning the White House and the beautiful ballroom he's going to build. All of these things are based in a kind of ideology that can be extremely negative. So architects need to be aware of the dangers of the theories that they're playing around with.
Yes.
It's a simple comment, really.
Thank you, Alan. This whole discussion has been around the interplay between history and theory, these two terms, history and theory. There's a third word that I haven't mentioned yet. And it's when my mentor and dissertation advisor, Stanford Anderson, founded the history theory program at MIT in 1975, 50 years ago. 51 now. He didn't stop at history theory. He called the program History, Theory, and Criticism. And of the three words, my colleagues and I have often shied away from the third term, in part because of the forces at play still that I referred to at the beginning of the talk. And that is the use of the term critical theory has not the hold that the word critical, the use of the word critical in that label, we haven't broken the hold of that yet. My paper in 2009 was an attempt to start the project of breaking the hold of that the problem with critical theory is not that it's critical. The problem of critical theory is that it's not critical at all. It isolates itself away from those things that we need to be critical of. So the word criticism is essential to be brought into the interplay of history and theory. I guess I'm trying to sneak it in, that when my students look at buildings and they draw these buildings and the examples that we have, the favorite thing that they label is symmetry and scale as an instrument of power. And so, and they don't stop there. They also label that power as being power for the good of the people or power to intimidate and control people. And so it is happening in our discussions. We are talking about power and the impact on users as a way of entering into the obligation of professionals, of design professionals, to be critical, to take a critical attitude. And the number one thing we do in architecture school is we critique. The professors are called critics. The final presentation is called a critique. The classrooms are called crit rooms. Everything is all about criticism, 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 hopefully on a good day, including positive criticism, but a critical approach that recognizes the positive aspects of student work. So criticism is already embedded in what we do every day, all day long. We just need to bring in the analysis that looks beyond aesthetics, beyond just the art historical approach to architecture, to introduce a social, cultural, economic, political analysis of what architecture does, how architecture does it, and to make sure that our architecture is a project of liberation, of critique and liberation from the systems that have beset us here in the 21st century. So thank you, Alan, for that question. And thank you, everyone, for a great experience here in Solo this past month. I'm very grateful to the welcome and just coming back to what really feels like my second home. Thank you.
I think we still have time for another question.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I think I want to ask a question.
Okay.
Yeah, because I remember that you mentioned about how we should share. You know, we should learn from the lesson of others, something like the Barcelona medallion and stuff. But does it come with a danger? Because this practice of sharing of the best practices, it has been shared around the world. And the thing is, this has become something more like maybe a bit ideological, where the source get benefits more and the application is not really being thought of carefully. And what do you think about that?
Thank you for that question. This is something that our faculty talk about a lot. Every time we go into the studio course and we ask the students to design a performing arts center, their first task is to go look at performing arts centers. So they collect photos of all these performing arts center, and I'd like to think it's changing a bit, but without the process and the skills of doing a deeper analysis, the students in the early years of the program, they simply show photographs. They show images of other performing arts center. I'm sure that happens here all the time. It still happens at Wentworth all the time. I think every architecture program can improve this. They simply show, here's a picture of this performing arts center, number 2, number 3. Aren't they beautiful? And then those ideas are treated like best practice. And then they do that. They do some version of that. And we tell them, you have to do better than what they did because they already did it. And that's it. One of the explicit tasks that we're engaging in is that's not good enough. And we tell our students in the advanced years, we say, you're not allowed to just show a picture. You have to engage the picture. You have to redraw it. You have to use your graphic development skills to dig into, to interrogate the example. What is going on here? Why is it like this? What does this do for the user experience? And that in-depth interrogation that they've learned starting in the second year of the program and are continuing all the way through, that deeper understanding, that analysis of the historical evidence has to generate a theory, for lack of a better word, but it generates an understanding that is distant from the context enough so that it can be critiqued and not just copied, but understood in a deeper sense so that that understanding can contribute to a reinterpretation and things can be critically selected. Well, this condition is different, so this part is not applicable, but this is similar enough so that it can be adapted and adjusted and made perhaps more powerful and more to sway and for the conditions of the design context. So our thesis students, we tell them you can't show a photo without changing the photo. You have to analyze to abstract out of it before you just follow it blindly. You have to take a critical attitude towards the precedent.
It turns out that there is another question. Could
Okay.
you please? Yeah. This is the last question.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Rai from architecture major fourth semester. So I listen the architecture and the government could do good and transform a society. But when the government could not be trusted, especially when it's proved by lots of issues nowadays, like the war, nepotism, incompetency, corruption, etc. I feel like no matter how much effort we as a normal human do, will do nothing if the government cannot be cooperated with, and it makes us feel powerless. So my question is, what can we, especially architects and architecture students, can do in order to still contribute to society and overcome this problem? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rai, for that excellent and important question. My graduate research was all about President Suharto and how he used real estate development, ring road development, skyscraper development to produce an image of development. And it was an instrument in the hands of President Suharto to capture the hearts and minds of Indonesians. Every night on TV, he would cut the ribbon on a new project. And this was an instrument for producing a consensus in Indonesia for supporting the Suharto government no matter what. It was worth the cost. So this was a very negative example of architecture and governance working together to very damaging, in some cases positive, but also in many cases, the larger outcome was not a positive one. So you have to look for the opportunities and start with the president and help them succeed if, to the extent that their intentions are to help the people. We were very lucky to have a mayor in Medellin, Colombia, that really revolutionized. He told the powerful and the rich, he said, listen, look at the crime, look at the murder rate, the highest murder rate ever in human history. Please, don't you wish the murder rate, don't you wish it were safer to live in Medellin? And so they allowed him to stop the corruption and use that money to benefit the poorest people, to give them opportunities to develop and flourish in the poorest neighborhoods throughout the valley of Medellin, Colombia. Sometimes mayors can do this, but sometimes your mayor is not interested in using power responsibly to benefit the people who need it the most. So then you go to the Chama, then you go to the Lura, and then you go to the Erwe, and then you go to the Erte. Did I get that right? And if the Erwe is not someone you can work with, architects have a tremendous education, a tremendous critical skills, a tremendous body of understanding to critically evaluate the world around them and to instigate change. I tell my students, if you're interested in these topics that we're talking about, go ahead, graduate, become an architect, become licensed, become successful. And then when you become frustrated, run for mayor. Believe it or not, you'll be surprised at how qualified you are to run for mayor compared to the other people who are running for mayor. And so run for RW, Kepala RW, run for Kepala RT, Pat Lura, Pat Chamat. If you don't have friends who are going to run for these offices, then you run for these offices. And deal with the work that is before you. Like the mayor of Semarang did some wonderful things. There are opportunities. Believe it or not, you are skilled. You have the skills to make change in the world. And it might be easier to be successful if you leave architecture or bring architecture to other professions. If it's not planning or a government position, the world is filled with roles for people trained as architects. You will be shocked at how valuable your skills are in the larger world, because your education is a superpower and you can do things, you can see the world in ways nobody else can see. You can identify opportunities for change that no one else will see. And this is an extremely valuable skill, whether you're working as an architect or anything else. So stay open to those opportunities. And when you get the chance, please jump on it.
Okay, that is the last question. I wish we have more time because it seems that yes. So I would like to conclude a very short conclusion. I think we start with the theory and history and how usually theory is quite separated from history, while actually theory can be seen as a simple, and we can develop theory from the evidence of history. But then there's also some problems because it seems like our curriculum in the Indonesia and the United States still to be quite similar. And so there's some effort to decolonize the curriculum, and then we can share about the practice from this place to another, from this country to another countries, and also that there's some importance about the collective actions of the architect and the community. And yeah, because of the state of the world now, it seems that some people see it as something that we cannot fight. But yeah, I think Prof. Robert Cowherd brings some hope that we can still do it by understanding the system and how the system works. And if we can, then we can make it better. Well, I think it can be done very quickly, definitely, but there's still hope for us to improve the world. Okay, thank you. And with that, I will return this to Gita and Linda.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the end of our journey, but this only marks the conclusion of our programs, not the pursuit of knowledge. Today, we have witnessed incredible performance and informative talk from Professor Cowherd and the excitement from the participations.
Finally, we have come to the end of this event. We are very much grateful to our speakers and moderator for the insightful session as well as all the participants here.
Before we proceed to the end this event, we will be handling a token of appreciation and there will be a documentation session after that.
We would like to invite Dr. Fauzan to present the plaque to Professor Cowherd as a symbol of our gratitude. Please come forward, Dr. Fauzan.
Dari tadi nggak ada background.
Okay, so can participant rise up, stand up for documentation picture?
For all the participants, you can stand up and come closer to each other.
Yes, please come closer to each other in the center. More closer, guys, to the center of the chair.
Enggak.
Can everyone in the left side come to the front? A little front to, okay. Okay, thanks.
In 3, 2, 1, look at the camera.
Okay, the formal pose already done, so we can do a freestyle, everyone. You can do whatever you want. Let's do a freestyle. Are you ready? Okay, I will count. 3, 2, 1. And then the third pose is architecture style. Do you know? Yes, yes. Let's make a triangle with your hands. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you, everyone. Bentar. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was the last agenda for today. I am Rinta.
And I am Gita. As the master of ceremony, we apologize for any mistakes made during this event. Let us close with Hamdalah together.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you for your participation and have a great day.